Should we introduce ourselves?
Why not? Cool.
Hi. You were about to say it, weren't you?
I was.
Well, you go first.
Hi, I'm Bethany.
And I'm Joseph.
So, the thing about love is,
It can be a little overdramatic at times.
just a little.
Yeah. When we're talking to somebody that we love, sometimes we're really passionate about the thing. Whether we are happy or whether we are upset, either way, we tend to be really dramatic. And you know, they always say that the biggest fish is the fish that got away, because fishermen, we always pick on fishermen because they exaggerate things.
Those
We call them
tails
fish
get
tails.
really big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we tend to do that when we get really emotional and invested in the conversations we're having with our partner.
Yes, and I think the longer you're with a partner or the more conversations you've had with a partner, the more invested you kind of get in those conversations because you kind of get in your head.
So one of the things that'll really help you communicate better and more honestly, which is important, is to be careful about the usage of universals. So for example,
You're always saying that.
no, I'm not. I'm not always saying that.
So I looked it up. I'm curious. I looked it up because I was like, always. I mean, I thought I knew what the definition of always was, but at all times, all the time, and on every occasion, that's always. And I'm like, that's not who does anything always.
Yeah, if you've ever listened to couples or siblings or anyone who's known each other for any length of time bickering, you'll probably hear something like, every time I do this, you do that, which it may be that most of the time they do, but there is actually a really big difference between saying, a lot of the time I say this, you say that, and every time, because every time is probably not true, and we're overemphasizing it to just get a point across.
Yeah, and when you try to get that point across, it really, I feel like, creates that divide. It creates that frustration in the other person, like, well, I don't always do that.
So your partner probably does have tendencies, and they probably do have some pretty predictable patterns if you've been with them for a while. And you may think, well, what's the difference? If they're doing it most of the time, why does saying always or never make any difference? Well, because those become like universal ideas, and what's embedded in that thought is that there's no possibility of changing that.
It is what it is, and forevermore.
Yeah.
And it's not accurate because we're all human and we do change. We change how we interact. We've changed how we interacted over 20 years.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
And our conversations we started with, and you taught me this, was the don't use always and never. Don't use those universals. And I was like, what? Because I grew up using those universals. It's what you do.
Well, and I worked with teenagers for a long time, and I would always hear parents, I said it. Yeah. So I spent a lot of time around teenagers, and I would hear parents constantly telling me, my teenager never listens to me, never listens to me. That is a really common sentiment that parents feel when they're raising a teen, but that's not true. Their teenagers do listen to them. What they usually meant by that is, it feels to me like they don't act on the advice I give them, or they're not obeying me, but they were kind of ignoring the fact that actually their teenager does listen to them, and probably a good portion of the time they just don't always react the way they want them to.
Yeah. So in that example, you just switched it from an always to it feels like. And I think that is probably a great way to start transitioning your brain and your speech.
Yeah.
To go, it feels like you do this a lot. Or it feels to me like, and that kind of brings that tension out.
Yes, but even without using the feelings, you can talk about quantity, and you can talk about patterns, and that's okay, because sometimes we need to point out, a lot of the time I say this to you, your response is like this to me. You might be totally accurate with that, and that might be a good thing to point out, but it feels different to that person than saying, every time I say this to you, you say this back to me. That is almost every single time you say something like that, they're going to get defensive in their head, and now you just have an argument.
I felt it already. Like, soon as you were saying that, my blood was starting to rush. Like, every time, it's in us. It's ingrained in us.
So never use universals, or I shouldn't say that. I should say, be very careful about using universals.
Absolutely.
Most of the time, they're not true.
They're not the truth. They're
Usually.
they're just over-exaggeration.
So the thing about love is it can be a little hyperbolic sometimes. You know, like hyperbolic.
I don't know what hyperbolic means. I know.
All right, hold for a second. My mic just came loose and it's falling down.
Cool.
This always happens.
Every time.